When basing a miniature, you need to have a base. For this video, I decided to go with a slightly bigger base than I normally would so you can see it in a little more detail. This one, I believe, is a 40mm base, usually used for characters. My name's Marcel, and this is Snakeworks. Okay then, so this is going to be the easiest basing guide ever made. It also comes out looking very nice, which is always handy. Let's jump in. So next up, you want some grit. I have this sandy stuff that I found on my parents' driveway near the coast. It cost nothing as I just dug it up. There might be some old bones or dried up dog shit in there too though. This stuff is a variety of grain sizes, but you can use what you like. Next up, you need some PVA glue. Be careful you get the right stuff here, as not all PVA is created equal. Some reactivates when it gets wet, which is totally useless. This is for exterior use, and it came from a DIY shop. It's pretty good stuff, and it also dries fast. The first thing to do is squeeze some of your glue out onto a plate or pallet or something. I use this old cork board, which is actually just a placemat turned upside down. It came from B&M or The Range or something. It's great for this sort of thing. What I like is that your glue will dry on that palette, and that adds some extra texture for when you use it as a dry brush palette. But dry brush palettes are a video for another day. So to prevent me getting glue all over my hands, I'm going to use some sort of holding implement. And my implement of choice is a pair of reverse tweezers. These things are great, and I highly recommend getting a pair. They're very handy. Then, using an old crap brush, don't use your new brushes, whatever you do, apply a good coating of PVA glue to the top of the base. Here's what it looks like with all that glue on. It reminds me of a soggy biscuit. Anyway, don't hold it up for the world for too long or the glue will just dry on you. So let's move on fast. Now, if I wasn't filming, I wouldn't have been holding it up like that, and I would have quickly moved on to the next stage. But I assume you know that. You want to get moving while the glue is still wet. I think the term is you strike while the iron is hot. I wonder what the origin of that term is. What the hell does it even mean? Using my tweezers as a handle, I then lower the base with the glue on right into the top of the grit and give it a little swish around. And here are the results of that. If you get a little muck around your rim, just wipe it off with your finger. Now be careful when fingering your rim, as you don't want to rip the texture off the top of the base if you're too rough. Then we take a little more PVA glue. Oh, no we don't. It appears I have run out. Hold on a minute, we need to reload the PVA. Okay, so with the PVA glue reloaded, we can now squirt some onto a palette, or in this case just add some with a brush as the nozzle appears to be clogged. Pro preparation right here, folks. I then add some water in and mix it around to thin it down a little. It's easy to go overboard with the water, so don't add too much too fast. Just add a touch at a time. You then apply that watered down PVA to the textured area of the base. Try your best not to add so much that it runs or drips down the sides of your rim. That's a mess that's a pain to clean up. Just take your time and try not to disturb the top texture. When all that is applied, you should have what looks like this. It was pretty easy to do, wasn't it? Now we have the boring job of waiting for that to dry. I would always recommend leaving it overnight. Now while I waited for mine to dry, I also watched some of the videos over at Squidmar Miniatures. He's trying to beat the Warhammer TV subscriber count, and I think he's very close, so go subscribe if you haven't already. Now over here at Snakeworks Studios, we're about 1% of the way to 600,000 subscribers. So if 555,000 of you fancy subscribing in the next 24 hours, we have a good chance of catching up. Okay, so that PVA fixing layer is now nice and dry. It still might be a little fragile, so don't be overly rough with it. So for an urban or ash wastes look, we need a black to prime it with. In this instance, I'm using Vallejo model colour black. Nobody can tell me why the label is wrinkled, but can you? After thinning the black a fair amount, I then paint the entire base top with it. It doesn't matter if you smear your rim this time, as we can just paint over that. I like to use quite a lot of paint, as the paint also helps to add another fixing layer, as it were. I assume there's a proper term for it, but I don't know it. Is it a sealing layer? Let's move on, while we wait for that to dry. Now normally when you have a few miniatures on the go at once, the first paint job has dried while you're working your way through the last ones. It allows you to keep a sort of factory line going. But when you're just painting just one base, there's a lot of waiting for paint to dry. Alright then, so here's the base, now it's all dried and ready. It looks like coal, doesn't it? If you ever wanted to paint coal, now you know how. So the next colour we shall be using is Vallejo model colour light grey, and that rusty agitator is still in there. I think I'm going to leave it there forever. Using a big flat dry brush, I then dry brush the base with the light grey. It's quite a heavy dry brush, almost an overbrush. Also, if there's a miniature on the base, you need to use a smaller brush and be a little more controlled. After that dry brush is applied, you have this. It's well on its way to looking fantastic. We're also nearly done. Now, I have always been a fan of the urban looking bases over the grassy, muddy, wasteland sort of base. I don't know if it has a proper term. The brown ones. The next colour on the chopping block is Vallejo model colour white. This is a nice thick white and is perfect for dry brushing with. Some whites can be a little too thin to dry brush effectively with. We then do some more dry brushing. Obviously this time the dry brushing layer won't be as heavy as the previous layer, but don't worry, we have a few more steps to tie everything together and blend things in regardless. Now once that dry brush has been applied, we need a shade. I'm going to use this Nuln oil, and this is the new formulation. I don't know how much different it is, but the pot is smaller. Oh, by the way, make sure you give it a damn good shake. Now I like to add my little balls to each of my paints. I actually use these ones, little metal ball bearings. Don't they sound wonderful? Not sure why I did that. They really help with the agitation when you're shaking the paint. But don't have one of those vortex mixer things yet, but it is something on my list to get or try at some point in the future. We then liberally apply the Nuln oil shade to the entire top of the base. Try your best not to put so much on that it drips or runs down the sides of the rim. Also, having your shade in a pot holder helps prevent nasty spillages. It happens to us all. With the Nuln oil shade applied, you have this. It's a lot more blended together now, but we can't really do anything as we need to wait for that shade to dry. I think it takes a couple of hours, but I usually leave it overnight just to be sure. After a few hours, or overnight if you're me, the shade is now dry, and you have this. There's lots of lovely contrast there, isn't there? I really like it, but it's not finished yet. So you could leave it there really if you wanted, and I think that would be absolutely fine. However, I always like to add a little more punch and pop to it. So let's do that, shall we? Let's return to the Vallejo model colour white, shall we? Return as in use it again. Now this time we dry brush the base again, but very, very gently. We just want to have a final highlight on the texture. If you apply too much, you sort of go back to the previous step and then we have to reshade it again. But luckily I pulled it off. It wasn't too hard, to be fair. And with the final highlight on the texture applied, you have this. I think that looks bloody lovely if I do say so myself. It's perfect for some urban rubble on the streets or some smashed up buildings. Now there's something about the stark grey on a base that I really like. I guess it's because it's a sort of neutral frame that you can just really put anything on. Unlike your generic grass green base, for example. The green might clash. Now the next colour we shall be using is Scale 75 Black. I don't like using this for general painting, but the black is great for rimming with. Using the Scale 75 Black, I then rim the base with it. The Scale 75 has a really matte look to it, which is perfect for base rims. They look really tidy. Now, before I put my paints away, I just want to give a shout out to all my patrons and channel members. Dan Yallop, Lee Blackley, Donald, Pine Tree, Bobzilla, Charles Marlowe, Andrew Marrington and Dr. Lee. Thank you all so much. I love you all. Now some people like to rim their bases in brown, but I myself have always preferred rimming with black. Hold on, there's a little article in this old White Dwarf 1997, no it was much earlier than that, 1987 I think. They talk about base rims. Hold on, right underneath these old zotes here, it says, if you're enjoying this video then please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. That means you, Louise. If you are enjoying the content on the channel then please consider joining the Patreon, the link to which is in the description below. Or up here somewhere. Got a squeaky chair. Anyway, it's reveal time. Let's have a look. And after only a few easy, fast steps, we have this, the finished article. A nice urban base, perfect for your games of Warhammer 40,000, the Horus Heresy, or any other game that might use bases. The base came together very fast, and I think the only hold-ups were the drying times. Anybody could do this, almost with their eyes shut. Are you going to have a go? If so, then let us all know in the comments below. Well, I think that's bloody brilliant. If you want to see some more tutorial videos, then check out the playlist up here somewhere. And as always, thank you very much for watching.